Hey everybody, Pete Ramsey, HVAC Greatness. Hope you're having a great day out there and a great holidays. If you're watching this when it hits the Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're seeing this, relatively quick, we're probably right in between the holidays. But going into 2021, we're going to be revamping our efforts on HVAC Greatness, particularly the HVAC Greatness private groups. Now, if you're one of those, if you're a member of one of those, hopefully you'll stay tuned and stay on top of this because we're going to be delivering some pretty impressive stuff. And I wanted to start this thing off by talking about this stuff right over here. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about a couple of studies that came back many years ago. And the ironic thing is these studies are just as accurate today as they were back, whatever year this was. And so we're talking about this Northwestern University study. Okay, so this is talking about customers doing business with a representative of an HVAC company and what the closing ratio was. Now, if the customer liked you and perceived you as an expert, you could get about an 80% closing ratio, which was phenomenal. If they didn't like you and they didn't perceive you as an expert, check it out, you can still get sales, about a 13% closing ratio. So there was something else there that they valued. Now, here we are, most of us, somewhere in between. We're either not liked as much as the other salesperson, let's say comfort advisor, or even selling technician, whatever that is, but we're perceived as the expert. We'll get basically 1 out of 3 of those. What's your closing ratio? Now, if we're liked, but we aren't really perceived that we're an expert, maybe we don't look like we know what we're doing, we're going to get over half the sales. Guys, this explains this whole push towards hiring salespeople in uniforms. Now, I caution you against that. I'm going to get into that why here in just a minute. What we need to do is either take a liked individual and make them an expert, or take that expert and make them a liked individual. And I'm going to propose that it's a combination of the two because no two employees are just alike. So we have to assess those situations. Now, here's another interesting one from Harvard University. This was a study. What part of your communication had the most impact on your prospective client? Well, it was interesting that only about 5% was what the person said. So now while we're always searching for just the right thing to, while we're always looking for just the right thing to say, that's not necessarily believable in today's consumers' eyes. In fact, they're going to be watching your facial expressions. About 58%, the vast majority, they're going to look at you and get a gut feeling, and a gut feeling is basically the subconscious that notices all these nuances and spits out the data. Honesty, liar, suspicious, whatever that may be. And if the facial expressions are good, you are way ahead of the game. The tonality of the voice. Pete likes tonality, don't he? The tonality of the voice. Hi, my name is Pete. Would you like to buy my furnace, right? We have a furnace. And the efficiency is so far superior to anything out there. It's absolutely mind-boggling. Whatever that may be, tonality is part of communication. And tonality is directly linked, in many cases, with the sincerity and the trustworthiness of the communicator. So having good facial expressions, having good tonality, being perceived as an expert, and being liked would be the holy grail, right? So let's talk a little bit about how all that comes together. There's a few points that I put directly above here that you really want to have dialed in as you go into 2020. Keeping in mind the studies that we just reviewed, keeping that in mind, let's talk about those. Number one is stick to your DNA. Now, you may have started your company from scratch. Perhaps you bought it from somebody else. And in many cases, it's that DNA incompatibility that is your biggest obstacle. By DNA, I mean who are you? I mean, who are you at your core? And it's based on that you build and develop a culture around, a brand around. And if you bought somebody else's brand, you need to revisit that and adjust accordingly. But essentially, you need to do and be everything that you actually believe in. You've got to be true to yourself. Because if you don't, those facial expressions will be inconsistent and you will not be trusted. The same is true, and this is the hard part to get your head around, and this is part of HVAC greatness and the HVAC X Factor. I've been talking about this for a long time. The same is true about your employees. That very employee that says, yes, boss, I'll do that, and then goes out and does the opposite is probably one of your better employees, and it's up to you to fix that. Now, why do you say that, Pete? Are you crazy? I tell him to do one thing, he does the opposite. A person that does something different than what they're told, there's a reason behind that. And the number one reason generally is they don't believe in that, and they're not going to do something that they don't believe in. You know, the boss would have you just buy a new system, but let me give you a tip. Just do this and you're going to be fine. Because they are true to their morals, to their values, their character, and everything that is good about them. Now, that's your problem and your challenge in order to get them to change that position and understand the perception that you have. And once you share that, the behavior will take care of itself. Okay. Stick to your DNA. Hey, let me give you an example on that. So once upon a time, I had a partner. We had combined forces. This guy was one heck of an installer, and I was a pretty good service tech. And so our services, or our talents, complemented each other really well. But our DNA was just so different. He had one way of thinking, I had another. He had one way of behaving, I had another. Essentially, he was an ass. And I perceive myself as a good guy, okay? Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. I was trying to be. I was genuine to who I was. And because of that conflict, we just couldn't get it together, and we ended up divorcing. You know, he went his way, I went mine, and you know, I haven't spoken to him in many, many years, but I reached out to him. I sent him an email. Didn't even answer it. He's still an ass, more than likely. Anyway, number two, never forget your why. When I started my business, I literally started out of the back of a station wagon. I put all of my tools in the back, in the flat part in the back, and I covered it with a dark wool blanket so that anybody, if they looked through the window, they couldn't see all my tools and stuff that was laid in there. And that's how I started my business. I couldn't afford a van. I was literally in a mill house over in the poorer part of town because I had just left my other company because the recession hit back in the 80s. Everything slowed down. And I had my license, thank goodness, and I started my business. But I carried in the visor a photo. It was a photo of my 3 children. And every day I'd get up and I'd get behind that wheel of that car and I'd look at that picture. And this was my why. This was my why. This is why I got out there and I hustled and I worked and I did what I did. Now that was my personal why. And fast forward 5 years, we owned our own home. My son, who had started school, he was about to fail the first grade. He had a speech impediment back then. He's fine now, but back then, and they were going to hold him back. I put him in private school. You know, my 2 girls went to public school, but we did the very best we could, and we provided a very nice home, and they had the best of everything that we could possibly provide. And I say that was a result of me looking at my why every day. Now, you need to have your why for your employees. You need to have why for your customers. You need to have a why that when your customers see that's why you do it, they admire it so much that they want to be a part of it. They want to do business with you. Okay, so you have more than one why. And you need to look at each one to motivate the situation based on which one it is, if that makes any sense. I hope that does. Okay, so care about your customers as well as your employees. This goes right back up to this stuff over here. What these studies are showing is, does the person standing in front of them really care, or are they just trying to make that sale? Are they paying attention to me, Or are they looking at their watch, thinking about that next call they've got? Let's hurry up. Let's move this thing along. When you care about your customers, it will come through. And the studies off to the left side of the screen indicate just part of how that is perceived. The reason people do business with other people is there is a feeling of trust, there is a feeling of likability, and there is a feeling of familiarity. Do I know this person? Do I like this person? Do I trust this person? And the best way you can get on somebody's good side is to display that you actually care about what they get out of your service. An example of that was I had a lady, oh my gosh, this lady gave me a hard time. Every time I'd go out, she'd whine about this and complain about that. And I'm, yes, ma'am, what about this? I bent over backwards for this lady, and it was job after job because she owned multiple properties. And I honestly thought the lady hated me, but one day I go out on an estimate. I go up to the front door. Before I could even knock on the door, the guy opens up the door and he says, "So you are Pete Ramsey?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Mrs. Such and Such told me about you." I immediately thought, oh my gosh, this guy's going to hate me. And you know what he said? He said, "That lady worships the ground you walk on. I don't know what you do, but she loves you. So I had to have you come check out my house." You see, guys, sometimes the return on investment isn't immediate, and sometimes it's not even observable, but it is there, okay? You continue to display that you care with your customers, and you're going to get the results. But that also, that doesn't stop as if you're at the owner capacity. It must trickle right down through your culture to your front line workers. They must care. They must literally care. And your processes that you put in place must clearly communicate that if you're going to have success in that category. And that category, get it right here in a minute, that category is everything we're talking about over here. It is key. Okay, so do the things that matter. Once upon a time, I was a territory manager for Lennox Industries, and I was working down in Southwest Florida, and I was calling on a dealer down there. And every time I'd go by, he was on his computer, and he was entering all this data. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, this program I'm doing is terrific." I said, "Well, tell me about it." What he was doing is he was taking every vendor that he had, suppliers, and he would literally line item by line item enter in every price that they would charge him for the different products that he used. Duct tape, sheet metal screws, you name it. It was all in there. And the program, when he come in to place the order, he would place the order and the program would automatically cherry pick the best prices. And that's how he would place his orders. And he thought that was going to be the key to his success. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I mean, I called on him. He was always working on this software. He was always having to update his pricing and things like this. And I went by one day and he was out of business. And so went down the street there to another company. I'm not going to say their name because they're still in business today. And this guy, I should say these guys who were partners, these guys were the most down-to-earth, good old boys you've ever met. By good old boys, I mean just real common. They don't sound as intelligent, nearly as intelligent as the other guy, as contractor A. But, buddy, they were just good people. And they literally blew it up. Why? Because they were spending their time, instead of looking at what they can save on money, they were looking at what they could give to their customers. How can we give greater value and a greater experience? And they were crushing it. So it's the things that you focus on, it's the things that you do most of the time that determine where you're going to go. So be sure that you're doing the things that matter. And finally, I want to encourage you to remember serendipity. And if you don't know what that word means, hey, bear with me just a second. I had worked for a company, one of the last companies I worked for, still in business today, terrific company, awesome company. And back at the time when I was working there, They were relatively new. They'd only been in business about 4 or 5 years. We had about 4 technicians. I think I was the 4th service technician, installation crew and everything else. Well, I ended up leaving. This guy ended up leaving. One of the installers ended up leaving. And around the same time, we each started our business. So we became friendly competitors. I'd help him out. He'd help me out. And I remember, his name was Ken. He was a really great guy. Ken would say, everything that Junior was the owner of the other company, everything that Junior touches just turns to gold. He's the luckiest guy. Everything he touches, he's got that golden touch, just turns to gold. And I just don't see it. We call that serendipity. Serendipity is oftentimes referred to as luck. It's referred to as being fortunate, being in the right place at the right time. Guys, that kind of stuff doesn't just happen. I mean, it does, but when it happens to the same person over and over and over again, it's because they're doing something on the back end that you can't see, that you can't measure on your spreadsheet. They're doing something that is creating this fortune. That's why we have to be true to who we are at the core. We got to be true to our DNA. We have to really care about not just our customers, but also our employees. We must care enough about our employees to bring them on board with our thinking process so they too can believe in our passion. They too can share our beliefs and convictions about the quality of this product or this service so they can stand behind it. And we got to be doing the things that matter. And generally, that's directly related to the things that display that you care. This is what your HVAC greatness will be built on. Now, there are entire processes that are built around taking the steps that display this. In other words, shortcutting the system. And you can do this. You can fake it until you make it, but you really need to get dialed in on the other part. And we call that the X factor. What is it about that company that people just keep calling back? They're higher in price. I'll wait on them. They're booked out to the next week. I'll wait on them. They're $1,000 more. Don't matter. I'm going with this company. What is it about them that creates this type of serendipity? If I use that right. P. Ramsey, your HVAC greatness. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did delivering it. You stay tuned. We're going to be doing some regular awesome stuff, and I'm going to show you how you can discover the best part of you and your company and share it with your customers and take your success to a level that your competition will be envious of. Pete Ramsey, your HVAC greatness. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.